We're starting lab 13 with some tissue samples, cardiac muscle, and the details within the sample. And we could bring up the screen here. So we have the lower power magnification of cardiac muscle. So you notice the lack of bright coloring to the sample, and the details are present. We can see the dark staining of the nuclei and the dark lines known as intercalated discs. And zooming in, closer view. So we can see, similar to skeletal muscle, the striations, the A and I bands. However, it's the very darkly stained, very prominent stripes, and you notice they're spaced apart, a distance from one another. Only at the border of the cell is where you find an intercalated disc. So the very dark, prominent stripes that are more spaced out. And again, the nucleus, right, the dark staining. Cardiac muscle tissue usually has just one nucleus per cell, sometimes two. And that's the first tissue sample. And now we're moving on to taking a look at some organs, right? An artery and a vein. And that'll be the first thing you see is the difference between an artery and vein at low power. The lumen is the hollow interior. So we could bring up the views here. So we have an artery here to the right side, and we can see the open lumen here, still filled with some blood cells. Whereas here to the left side of the screen, here we have a vein, and due to the thin structure of its tunics, veins tend to fold and collapse when there's no blood, when there's no pressure. So that's what we're seeing here, the thicker rounded artery. But again, they both have a hollow space, and that hollow space inside is the lumen. So now moving to the tunic layers, we'll start from the inside and work our way out. So again, the hollow space is the lumen on the inside of the blood vessel. And then now where we see this dark line here, I'm kind of highlighting across it, the inner layer is the tunica intima or tunica interna, either name's fine. The middle layer is the tunica media, and the external layer called tunica externa or tunica adventitia. So we can see them really well on an artery because it has a thicker tunic wall. But of course, those same three tunic layers, intima, you notice the media is much thinner, and the tunica adventitia. So we see those three layers for artery and a vein, and just a closer look for each. So zoomed in right here, the entire tunic wall for an artery. So again, we can see the details of each tunic layer specifically. The tunica interna on the inside, the tunica media, the middle layer, and the tunica externa is now that superficial layer. And they're much thicker for an artery. And here zoomed in on the wall of a vein. Again, the three layers are present, but the tunica media is much thinner. In fact, you notice the thicker layer for a vein, the thickest tunic layer for a vein is the tunica externa. And again, the lumen is the hollow interior. All right, so that's our two samples for this section. So now moving into the heart model, we'll just go down each column for details on the heart, and we'll take a look at the figures here. So these pictures will be posted up for you on our Canvas page so you could view the pictures, and of course we'll work through the model here together. So here we have a heart model that's been opened up so we can see the internal chamber. So we'll start here, and this is the right atrium, so the superior right chamber. And keep in mind, we're looking at the heart. We're looking at as if it's another person's heart facing us, this anterior view. So keep in mind, this is the right side of this view, and then over here would be the left side. And one thing to always look for in terms of right and left is the thick myocardium. So this thick layer myocardium is always going to be the thickest layer, the thickest chamber wall is on the left ventricle. So starting here at the right atrium, and then we see the valve here labeled F on the model's key, the right atrioventricular valve or tricuspid valve. As we move inferiorly down into the ventricle, this section here, or seen really well over here, that's that term of the papillary muscle. So the papillary muscle. It's embedded in the structure of the ventricle. It's a portion of the muscle. The pulmonary semilunar valve, we get a partial view right here. However, we're going to rotate our view. So we're looking at the heart now more from the right side. And here's a good look at that pulmonary valve. There's the pulmonary veins. So we're now at a posterior view, and we can see the multiple pulmonary veins. And for reference, they're all leading into the left atrium. We'll turn it again. We're now viewing from the left side of the heart, and we're able to see the left atrioventricular valve. So the left atrioventricular valve, as well as here's a view now of the aortic valve. We'll then go to the posterior view, and this large vein we see here. This is a coronary sinus on the posterior side of the heart. And then going back to the next column, here we are looking at the anterior view of the heart, and it's now all intact. The model's all together. And the term auricle, external to each atrium. So we're looking at the fold of tissue here on the external surface, and that's the term, the auricle. So external to the space of the atrium, the auricle. And we'll open up the model again. We've already pointed out the atrioventricular valves, and we'll do that again for reference. So of course, here's the right side, and over here is the left atrioventricular valve. Inferior to each of them, so where we see the tendons, these are known as chordae tendineae. So they're found inferior to each atrioventricular valve. We've already started out with the right atrium is superior. And now the space within here, we'll kind of highlight this in, color it in. That's the space of the right ventricle. We've already pointed out the pulmonary valve. And now exiting out here is the area of the pulmonary artery. And there is a pair right and left at the branch pulmonary arteries. On the opposite side now, we could label here the left atrium, so the left superior chamber. And then in this area, the space is what we're indicating, the left ventricle. All right, so a number of valves and chambers we can see here. Continue with our list. So here's the space of the left ventricle. We'll just go ahead and label that again. The aortic valve. And now passing out of that, we have the large artery, the section in particular curving upwards. It's called the ascending aorta. And then as it starts to reach its peak and curve around, there's now the aortic arch, or the arch of the aorta. And we'll turn the model again. So now we have a view from the right side. So as a reference here, we're able to see the auricle on the right atrium. And connected to the right atrium, we have the superior vena cava. And here we just have a cut little remnant, what's left of our biggest artery. That's just the very base and end of the inferior vena cava, both of which lead into the right atrium. So that's our section with the heart models. The next section you see comes right from this textbook figure. So I'll just bring that up briefly. So using this figure here, and just a quick look at the list, there's both the SA node, the internodal pathways, leading down to the AV node. And in this case, SA and AV are acceptable abbreviations. Same goes for the AV bundle, and it splits to, you notice there's a right and left bundle branches, and then terminating with the Purkinje fibers. So all of the conducting system just taken right from this illustration. And the final thing for activity 13 is taking a look at the names of blood vessels. So the naming for the arteries and the veins. And that brings us here to this model, and we have a key for it. And again, both of these are available for you on our Canvas site. So to begin with our list, let's just go ahead and bring this up. So starting with the common carotid arteries on the neck, brachiocephalic, subclavian. So let's do these first few. So we do have a key, of course, right next to us. So these first few we won't have to worry about. So common carotid arteries, we're looking for the artery, and we'll just go with the key there. Letter C, the arteries in red. These are systemic arteries carrying oxygen-rich blood. And in this case, the arteries traveling up the neck. That's what we're looking for the common carotid arteries. The brachiocephalic, we're not concerned with the trunk. The trunk is an artery. We want the brachiocephalic veins. So we're looking right here in the blue color, these two branches here for brachiocephalic veins. So we're not going by this key here. Subclavian, now at this point, for the arteries and the veins, we're just simply looking at now the red and the blue, the red artery, the blue vein, right here by the area where the clavicle would be, subclavian. And then moving on to the area of the armpit, and it's a little easier to see on this opposite side just for the artery. So in the area of the armpit, we're getting down to axillary. We could continue down past the humerus for brachial artery. Again, this model doesn't show the veins, just the arteries on this arm, as you notice. So now traveling down past the brachium, we get to the area where it splits here on the forearm. And again, this model is showing the arteries coming down the arm. So it'll be on the lateral side is where we see, you notice, the labeling for the radial artery. And on the medial side is where we would see the ulnar artery, right? Just by the bone there. So each of those are labeled. Median cubital, that's now unique to the veins. So the median cubital vein, we're looking right at the area of the elbow, the anterior side of the elbow. And we're looking right across here for that median cubital vein. So crossing at the elbow. Let's get rid of some of the writing there. There's the inferior and superior vena cava. So you notice the heart here and inferior vena cava. So this large vein traveling up the abdomen is the inferior vena cava, inferior to the heart. And the opposite of that, superior to the heart, superior vena cava. And you can notice is how those two brachiocephalic veins merge together and form that superior vena cava. So next on our list, we have thoracic aorta, abdominal aorta. So unfortunately, we're not able to see thoracic aorta because it's posterior to the heart. So we don't have the best view for this location. And it's now, you notice the diaphragm here, this letter N for reference. And inferior to the diaphragm, this is where we see the abdominal aorta. So that's where that separation takes place at. So now the remaining branches will all come off of here, and we'll zoom in to get some better detail in this area. All right, so here we are zoomed in. Now you notice a closer look at the thoracic and abdominal regions. So again, the large artery is that abdominal aorta. So the abdominal portion of the aorta, again, inferior to the diaphragm. And now we have a number of branches that are coming off of it. And the next several arteries in the list going down the page are in order from superior to inferior. So that most superior branch that we see here, it branches off of the abdominal aorta, and then in turn it has multiple branches itself. So we'll point right to the middle there, and that's the celiac trunk. And the term celiac, this area near the stomach, and the term trunk, a celiac trunk implies it's an artery that has itself multiple branches. So the base of all those branches, celiac trunk. And now the next one moving down here, it's just this little circle right there. In fact, I covered it up. So it's cut really short on the model, but just that little circle pointing forward would be superior mesenteric artery. Right here, you can see the shape of the kidneys, and connected to the kidneys, those are the renal blood vessels, so a renal artery and a renal vein, seen in blue, of course. The small little skinny ones that are starting up high and descend down low, because these are now showing the span of the gonadal blood vessels, and gonads meaning the reproductive organs. So we'll label that. And now the next branch you see here, again, cut short, spanning to the left, not as short as superior mesenteric, but here is now the inferior mesenteric. And mesenteries is referencing the intestines, which they connect to, both superior and inferior mesenteric arteries. And now here we are at the end of the abdominal aorta, and we see how it splits into right and left sides. So the first branches we see there are now the common iliac blood vessels. And then now where it splits again, the medial branches, these are called internal iliac. And the lateral branch that continues down to the thigh for artery and vein, these are external iliac blood vessels. Further lateral branch. And now we can see for reference the bone, the femur. So that would bring us down to the area of the femoral artery and location of femoral vein. So since we're still here on this view, we could go back to a few. Here's a closer look at that median cubital vein. Median cubital vein, and again, you notice the thumb is on the lateral side, radial versus ulnar arteries, just on that closer look. So we'll go back to the wide view to finish up. So again, you can see it's from the external iliac, this letter V here. And then that leads us right into the femoral artery. And again, this model is just concentrating on arteries for this left side here. As we span down now to the posterior side of the knee, that's where it now becomes the popliteal artery in name. And as now this popliteal blood vessel will begin to branch, we'll be able to see, you notice this leg is rotated here out laterally, posterior to the tibia. That's where we're able to see a posterior tibial artery. And on the anterior side of the tibia, there's the anterior tibial artery. And again, with the wide view, here's all the various arteries that we had zoomed in closer on for the abdominal region. And that's where our lab wraps up. You notice we're able to see just a little nice mnemonic for the arteries that branch off of the abdominal aorta from superior to inferior. And there they are. And here they are spelled out right here for us.